Start your step, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour, tout le monde. Mon nom est Robert Bertrand. Je suis le chef national au Congrès des peuples autochtones. My name is Robert Bertrand, and I am the national chief of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. We, as a board, have decided to come and have a discussion with you about the budget that was presented last Tuesday to give you our point of view. And I am accompanied this afternoon by Chief Lisa Cooper, by Chief Lorraine Augustine, and by Chief Amanda LeBlanc. In my humble opinion, this budget is a disgrace. The Trudeau government is again discriminating against the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples who represent the off-reserve. The Congress, or CAP, we signed an accord in 2018, a political accord, and this after 2 years of negotiation. But Minister Carolyn Bennett has only paid lip service to us. Budget 2019 has no funds at all for our accord. Joint priorities for housing and education are in the accord, but the government decided not to fund it. We are talking here about real people, not politics. These are people. These are our constituents that are living off reserve. Another thing, the minister is in denial on the 2016 Cap Daniels decision. The government is acting like they are not responsible for us, the Métis and non-status peoples. What I would like to say to the minister is, Minister Bennett, you are responsible for all Indigenous people, not only for a select few, but for all Indigenous people, the ones on reserve, off reserve, across Canada. The federal government is not upholding the honor of the Crown. You cannot help certain groups and not help the other. This is pretty well what I have to say. I will now pass it on to Chief Lorraine Augustine.
Thank you, National Chief, and good afternoon. I just want to reiterate what National Chief Bertrand is saying. The government continues, and especially Carolyn Bennett's department, continues to discriminate against us. Like, this ministry really needs to wake up. They are responsible for us. Daniel said she was responsible for us, and she continues to act in denial. So, from my point of view, she needs to wake up. She really does. And with the budget, with the political accord, to reiterate, we signed a political accord. No money's been flowing. All we're getting is lip service. Whether she wants to admit to that or not, we're getting nothing but lip service. We did everything that they wanted for the political accord. We did a work plan. And what does the government do? Her department comes back and tells us what our priorities should be. She talked about working with all Indigenous peoples. Well, I can guarantee you she's not. When it comes to the urban off-reserve Aboriginal people, she has left us out completely. She says, oh, I talked to First Nations. Well, you know what? First Nations are bands. Under the Constitution of Canada, Section 35, it says Indians, Inuit, and Métis. Now, whether she wants to admit to that or not, we fall under the Constitution of Canada, and she is continuing to discriminate against us because we're off reserve. So something needs to be done. And I'm not afraid to say, Minister Bennett, you need to start taking responsibility for your ministry and your department. Having said that, I will let my colleague, Chief Amanda.
Thank you. So as been reiterated a couple times, we are continually discriminated against, and this is not a new fight for us. Native councils across this country have existed for nearly 50 years. This is not something that's new to the government. We are not a new population that they're not aware of. This is something that we continue. I'm of the third generation here having this discussion with current government, and nothing has changed. So when we're asked the questions, especially $4.5 billion being invested to Indigenous peoples, where are we left out? So I'm going to talk a bit about exactly how we're being left out of this. For Jordan's Principle, there was $1.2 billion allocated, which is great. But as we've seen in current discussions, it's not accessible to everybody. If you're non-status, if you're Métis, you have zero access. But even if you're status, you have to have a certain level of status. There are 14 categories. Not all will have access to Jordan's Principle. Languages is getting $330.7 million to implement the Indigenous Languages Act, which is being discussed currently through Bill C-9. And it plans to be administered through Heritage Canada. But again, that'll be administered through the reserve school system, which is not accessible to 75% of the Indigenous population, which resides off reserve and accesses public services through public entities. Again, through education, we have $815 million going to described specifically divided between only First Nation, meaning reserve communities, the Métis and the Inuit students. Again, 75% of the population accesses through education through public school systems. How are we going to access Indigenous knowledge through education and improved access? The calls to action are getting $194.6 million, but the 10 calls to actions that are being dealt with are specifically with the reserve focus. And not to say that we don't think that the reserves shouldn't receive this funding. We are all in agreement that our cousins on reserve definitely need it. What we're here today is the disgusting continued discrimination on how we are not being dealt with and we're being pushed to the wayside. Some of the other spending, the $328 million, $9 million is going to Inspire, which is an Indigenous education bursary program. But they specifically only will fund students who have a status card. And their explanation for that is that rule comes from the federal government. So they're actively excluding Indigenous students based on the status card, which is something created by the government themselves. $60 million is going to urban Aboriginal programs, including friendship centers. Now, this is, of the $4.5 billion, the only way I see off-reserve Indigenous communities being able to access anything to improve their quality of life. Another, we have a $211 million increase to management on reserve specifically. So that does not give capacity to off-reserve communities to be able to help our people. And $48 million for infrastructure projects specifically on reserve to protect them from climate-related hazards. Now, please explain to me how this is dealing with the majority of the Indigenous population who resides off reserve when it's all being focused to reserve communities, and how we are going to improve the quality of life of our constituents and members.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with my colleagues. Some of the things I wanted to talk about was child welfare and the consultation. We're not consulted in any of the child welfare acts that are being done, but yet over 75% of the population, Indigenous population, reside off reserve. Many of these kids are aging out of the system without any supports. And who do they turn to? The Native councils that you see in front of us and other PTOs from the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. And we have the highest representation in the justice system, the highest
dropout rate, the highest in the child welfare rate, if you don't start addressing these Indigenous community members that are off reserve, you're not going to address the social determinants of health. We look at housing. The majority live off reserve. They're coming from the reserves into our community. They're leaving communities that are unhealthy, and they're looking for programs and services. And that's what we're there to do, is to provide programs and services. Other areas that we've talked about is economic development and consultation. When we met with the Minister Bennett, one of the things that she had asked us is, who are you? Who do you represent? My response is, Minister Bennett, you've been funding us for well over 50 years. We are core-funded organizations, Indigenous representatives organizations. If after 50 years you don't know who we are, maybe it's time to bring us to the table. You talk about key priorities. What are our key priorities? You're not going to find out if you keep excluding us from your consultation meetings on child welfare, housing, economic development, youth issues. TRC 66 calls to actions, talks about funding for youth programs, yet there's no investment. And one of the things that I want to talk about is there can be no reconciliation. No reconciliation without justice. And justice means that you start looking at the most impoverished community. We are more impoverished now than our cousins on reserve. We are called the poor cousins. This should be an embarrassment to Canada, because you're excluding a population that, if you do not include, you're creating the same results. You're doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We want to move forward with this government. We want our community members to be healthy and to be a part of the economy and to contribute to society. So we call on this government to start including the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples and its PTOs. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Et en terminant, je voulais tout simplement vous laisser aux auditeurs et aussi avec le gouvernement fédéral. S'il vous plaît, consultez-nous, le Congrès des peuples autochtones et d'ailleurs tous les affiliés que vous voyez à côté de moi. On est là pour vous donner un coup de main. On est là pour travailler ensemble. On est là pour aider nos gens qui ont besoin tellement d'aide. On a juste à regarder ce qui se passe dans les grandes villes et j'en suis convaincu que vous allez comprendre les problèmes que ces gens-là vivent. Merci beaucoup.